It was 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, so I had a pretty good buzz going when I was interrupted by a phone call. I hate it when the phone rings. My job is so much easier when that doesn't happen. "Look outside," a frantic voice yelled before I could introduce myself as town sheriff. "Calm the fuck down," I answered in my best attempt to sound soothing. "Where are you?" "It doesn't matter," she screamed back. "Look outside anywhere." That probably wasn't a good sign. Was there any way that could have been a good sign? No. Fuck no. I pulled the Colt Python out of its holster because no one had told me I couldn't use a .357 Magnum as a service weapon, and ran outside. I love living in big sky country because an unbroken firmament reminds me that the universe just doesn't give a shit if I live or die. I think that's beautiful. But something was different today. The sky was purple. It shouldn't be purple. That's the wrong color. Damn it. Worse still, a black cloud was descending with the speed of a crashing 747. Soon, it was close enough to see that it wasn't a cloud. It was a mass of writhing tentacles. Each one had to be over 19 feet thick, and there were at least 13 of them. I wanted to puke then and there, but I swallowed the chunks right back down. It was headed for Mrs. Olson's coffee house. I loved Mrs. Olson, and I liked her lukewarm coffee. I ran. The street was eerily silent and charged, just like the moment before a lightning bolt strikes. I could hear nothing other than my own boot strikes against the broken road. I knew I wasn't going to make it in time, but so much of our soul is defined by behavior in hopeless moments. And so I ran on. One thick, 100-foot-long tentacle shot forth and spiraled around the building as the black mass lowered itself to the ground. My lungs burned. I was still too far away. I heard Mrs. Olson scream. The mass became part of the earth as an impossible black emptiness pooled into existence where there had once been an open field. One end of the tentacle fell into the void. The other wrapped further around Mrs. Olson's house. Then it squeezed. Every window exploded as the entire structure was wrenched from its foundations. I stopped running and cowered in the street. That's when Mrs. Olson appeared in a broken window pane, apoplectic with fear. "Help me, Chief Varsani." Her arms were covered in blood. "I don't want to die alone." The gargantuan tentacle wrapped around the house once more. I pulled out the Colt and fired, but it penetrated no deeper than a gerbil fucking an orca. Like a really goddamn big orca, even bigger than normal. I could have run after Mrs. Olson, but at this point, that would simply have meant following her into the abyss. She looked at me, and understood that I wasn't going to help her. This was the last sensation she ever had. The black tentacle lurched again, reducing the walls to splinters and dragging the entire building into the hole. I watched the whole fucking thing disappear into empty space and realized just how goddamn stupid we are for assuming that we'll survive any given day. The blackness swirled like a toilet swallowing the remnants of a prune casserole, and very suddenly it was gone. The air was no longer charged, but the building was no longer there. It was quiet. I wandered over, dazed, to the shredded foundations. "Good morning, Chief," Clifford said as he staggered by, adjusting his overalls. "Did someone finally buy the vacant lot?" I narrowed my eyes at him. "You don't remember Mrs. Olson's being here 30 seconds ago?" He stopped walking, then slowly turned to face me. Martha suddenly appeared on his left, sneering enough to proudly display her lone remaining tooth. "We don't talk about Mrs. Olson anymore. Remember, Chief?" Drool rolled down her chin. "I'm not going to lie. She gives me a case of the wilty nipples in the best of times, but that warning was downright creepy. This is why I never take off my sunglasses. I knew that she was gauging my reaction, and I didn't want her to read me." "Right," I responded. "This lot has been empty for years." Martha and Clifford both nodded as I pissed my pants just a little. Then I walked back across the street to the police station and drank 10 beers. What a shitty fucking Tuesday. I don't usually leave the station until 8 p.m. so that I can go to bed shortly after getting home. This makes me feel less lonely. So I was more than a little irritated when the station door opened at 7:59 p.m. Police spend a lot of time wishing that emergencies were scheduled more conscientiously. A little boy walked in whom I'd never seen before. He was around 10 years old and ghostly pale with a shock of alabaster hair. I could actually feel my balls curdle right past my taint as he cruised up to my desk. He had no pupils in his eyes. They were just as white as his hair. I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off. "I just wanted to tell you that you aren't crazy, Chief Varsani." He didn't smile. "Oh, thank you, son." I knew that I should have felt bad about thinking a child is straight up creepy, but I did not. "Do you need help from me, or were you just about to leave my office forever?" He cocked his head to the side. "I thought you should know that it's going to stay here as long as it has a living host. I'm telling you, because everyone else would rather give up. I nodded like he was speaking normally instead of making my butthole pucker. He smiled, and it was just so sad. Then he turned and walked up the wall, flipped upside down and strolled across the ceiling, paced down the other wall, and walked out the door. When I started breathing again 30 seconds later, I realized that I had been holding the barrel of my Colt in a white-knuckle grip. When I followed him into the dark Montana night, I found myself alone once more. What else could I do? I packed up and went home. Fucking Tuesdays. I'll start by saying this is all true. I've changed the location names, etc. in order to protect anyone stupid enough to go looking for this place. I grew up in the greater metropolitan area of New York and New Jersey, and in one town we moved to, we lived on a dead-end street. Down the middle of the road were the town limits, making across the street another town altogether. The area across the street was zoned for commercial use, so instead of houses, we had a view of 3 factories, a car mechanic, and a used car lot. Most afternoons, outside after school, I'd hang out outside my house with a couple of friends, either riding bikes or kicking a ball around. One day, my friend JC kicked our ball into the bushes outside the sewing factory directly across from my house. It was a nearly dilapidated brick building with darkened windows and a steel door that creaked loudly each morning when employees would arrive to start their shifts. We never saw the employees, but we'd hear the door open in the pre-dawn hours and figured it was when they'd arrive. From outside, you could often hear the loud sounds of sewing machines, the banging of tools, and the occasional scream and grunt. It was coupled with puffs of hot steam pumping non-stop into the air at all hours of the day and night, and a stale smell that always reminded me of standing sewer water. None of us wanted to venture into the overgrown bushes, but after losing best of 3 rounds of rock, paper, scissors, I found myself begrudgingly digging through the stinging nettles, and what I imagined was poison oak, to find our ball had landed squarely on the carcass of a rotting animal. I scrambled back, cussing up a storm. My friends ran over only to stumble back from the rotten stench of decay that wafted up into the air. The commotion resulted in 2 things. First, the noise from the factory stopped. For the first time in ever, the endless sound stopped. Secondly, the heavy steel door opened in front of us. Hot steam escaped into the late afternoon air, and from inside there stepped a tall man. I don't know what we expected, but it wasn't what we saw. He was a white man with curly black hair and a half mullet, high-waisted jeans and a crisp white overstarched shirt and shiny black dress shoes. He didn't look like anyone we'd seen in our neighborhood, let alone in any factory foreman we'd ever seen. We live in a very diverse working-class neighborhood, and this guy looked like someone straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. "Well, hello, young people," he said, cocking his head to the side as he looked down on us. His voice was nasally and saccharine, and his cadence was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It made listening to what he was saying difficult. He was clean-shaven, and his skin was so white it showed almost every blue vein in his forearms and face. "Oh, I see you lost your ball. Let me help you," he said, his sing-song cadence almost lulling me into a false sense of safety. It was only JC, tugging on me to pull me up in a way that broke the momentary spell. We didn't wait for the ball, instead hopping on our bikes and riding away. Looking back, I saw him standing at the center of the road watching us, ball in hand. I couldn't stay away forever, and as the sun set, I rode back alone. There, on my front stoop, was a brand new soccer ball with a small note attached. "Your other ball had something on it. From your neighbor Steve." I dropped my bike onto the floor and looked at the note as well as the new ball. While very nice, and a lot better than my old one, I still didn't want it. Something about Steve gave me the creeps, and my abuela had taught me that when the creeps talk, we listen. I kicked the ball back into the bushes and pocketed the note. It was only a few days later that I'd discovered just why I was right to have listened to my abuela. It was during a game of touch football that our friend Carlos found himself atop a pile of garbage bags on the curb of the sewing factory. Sanitation had gone on strike, and garbage pickup was disrupted. Garbage that would have previously been picked up in the early dawn hours was now sitting piled haphazardly on the curb. Our taunts of Carlos lasted only until we noticed the dark viscous fluid that seeped from the bags under Carlos. "Oh, that's fucking nasty," I can remember one of the girls saying as we moved closer to see what it was. It was then that we got hit with a smell. Some gagged, the rest retched onto the street. I ran up into my house and called my mother. She called the cops, and soon they'd closed down the street and got a warrant to search the factory. Inside, they found coolers filled with unidentifiable cuts of meat, a wall covered in wigs made with human hair, and tan skins being made into brand-name purses and wallets. We watched as cops needed smelling salts, some looking green as they stumbled out of the factory, hands covering their mouths. In the office, they found file folders full of employee paperwork that matched up with missing persons reports going back years. My dad told us most had been undocumented and not likely to be noticed if they went missing. I remember crying for hours with my mom and others that gathered at the candlelight vigil for all those lost. It was only after the police tape was gone and the fervor was forgotten that I once again saw our neighbor Steve, standing in the middle of the road, looking up to my window, my soccer ball in hand, as he waved.